Hey. So I did Fury on Champlain. I lied to you at the end of it. I didn't complete the last 2 turns. You know, if I were playing opposed, there's no way I would. There's no way anybody reasonable playing either side would want to continue it. The Brits could not have possibly taken the rest of those hexes, given the ratio of damage they would have to do. The question is that sort of a foregone conclusion when you set up the game? And I think actually it is. Maybe I'm misreading the rules, or one of the many versions of the errata, but it seems like it's really easy to slow that British advance down. Okay. So it's a completely unbalanced game under its historical scenario. What about the ahistorical scenarios? What do they do? Well, they up the ante. So one of them, Prevost, gets up his standard up. That removes all the restrictions on Prevost, but there's a cost in the victory conditions. The British player has to control all of the towns in New York and have an operating supply line to entry hex E, which is all the way down on the south of the game. He also has to win a naval victory, which, as we saw, may not be the easiest thing. The English Navy doesn't just completely overwhelm the American Navy. I thought it would, actually, at least once the Confiance was up to good status. It doesn't appear to. And the naval victory is defined as having at least 2 combat ships remaining and a 2-to-1 advantage over the American naval guns. Now, if they started with those conditions, they could actually win a real naval battle pretty easily, but they don't, and they don't come close to that. The other options, Izard's brigade puts another whole force of American troops on the board, set up in Plattsburgh, and what do you use for if you're playing without Prevost's incompetence with that, use the normal victory conditions. If you're playing with it, the British win by taking 2 hexes of Plattsburgh north of the Saranac River. Okay, they could do that. Maybe not with all those other troops, and trace an unbroken supply line, and by winning a naval victory. Well, again, the requirement for a naval victory, at best, even if everything else were very easy, brings the game to about a crapshoot, in my opinion. We saw the British Navy pretty handily defeated. Now, I'm not sure what could have been done differently there. It didn't feel like the Americans were terribly lucky in getting that victory. In fact, I would say the edge in the naval battle goes to the Americans. It may be that gunboat somewhere in the errata has rules saying, oh, it shouldn't be that big, because it looks ridiculously big. It outguns the Confiance, which is to say, if setup is completely controlled, maybe the British need to set up and face that gunboat and sink it early. If that happens, the whole scenario, the whole naval battle, does swing more into their hands, because all the guns are located on something without a lot of flotation hits available to it. But how do you control that? It's not clear in the rules how the setup is arranged. I allowed the British to set up second. I'm not sure there's any reason to believe that it shouldn't be simultaneous and secret. And the third option is the sloop President, which gives the Americans another moderate-sized ship. And that doesn't seem to have any victory condition changes. It just gives the Americans another moderately good ship. And this game is really kind of indicative to me of what 3W put out in general. I looked at some of their magazine games and said, these are at at their best, they were very light, not terribly innovative games. Now this one has some interesting combinations with the naval aspect, with the falling back of the Americans trying to play delaying tactics. It could be a really interesting situation. And also, there simply aren't enough games on 1812, and yes, I'm greatly looking, or on the War of 1812, I'm greatly looking forward to Mr. Madison's War. But, you know, the execution was just not interesting enough, even if the game was a balanced, decent game with a rule set that was significantly larger than, say, the errata sheets. And that's definitely a minus to it, is when you have to pick through the errata and the rules to try to figure out what actually is meant. And there's still stuff missing, significant stuff missing. The one big thing for me with this was a 3W boxed game. Well, I have one other of those, which was Sink the Bismarck, which I have to say wasn't abysmal. You know, it's a serviceable game, but it was definitely a step down from the old Avalon Hill Bismarck in terms of detail, complexity, interest of the game, the hidden movement aspect. The actual mechanisms to play the game didn't work well, in my opinion. They weren't horrible, but they did. And this is only my second 3W boxed game. I had the thought maybe they put more effort into these than they did the magazine games. Not that that really makes sense, because the magazine games have a much wider audience. So, like SPI, they may have actually put less effort, and that's what it appears to be here. Again, interesting situation. Doesn't feel like there's much of a game in it. Doesn't feel like it's worth the effort to push through the errata and the trouble of the rules. Maybe somebody will come up with some somewhat more interesting games on this type of subject. Maybe they already exist. I don't know. Anyway, try to get some other things played. I got another shipment in, and just getting overwhelmed with games. And it seemed reasonable to stop this, because otherwise I would probably delay all day and play those turns. But you know, if I was sitting there playing against someone as the British, I would just say, I'm not going to attack anymore. I can't do it. You know, there's just no point. And as the Americans, I would be like, well, it's not like I'm coming out after you. I've got my victory conditions. There's no reason for me to risk anything. And until you're fleeing, I don't see any tactical advantage to attacking you near Plattsburgh. All right, well, I don't know what's next. No idea at all. Maybe we'll be getting back to SPQR, but I kind of want to play something else, and I'm not sure what.